Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this, our July Wednesday Wake Up Club breakfast. We've got a good program for you today. We live in interesting times. I see in this morning's newspaper that the Obama administration is suing in federal court to invalidate the Arizona law, which has the intention of enforcing federal laws which the Obama administration is not enforcing. Very, very interesting. Leadership Institute has already trained 4,121 students in 2010, and since 1979, thank you. Since 1979, the Institute has trained 86,053 students. And you have before you the current schedule of schools that are coming up in the immediate future, and I urge that you consider attending one of these schools or sending a friend to one of these programs. Now, my pleasure to present to you Tiffany Bates, who will offer an invocation and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Tiffany is an intern at the Leadership Institute's Employment Placement Service Department, and she is pursuing a bachelor's degree from Hillsdale College in Michigan. Tiffany?
Would you please bow with me? Dear Lord, we thank you for letting us be able to gather here together and to fellowship and learn more about our country and how wonderful it is. And please guide us as we pursue truth and defend liberty, and open our hearts to what our speaker has to say to us today. In Jesus' name, amen.
Did anybody know where the flag is? The flag, Mary says it's on its way. Well, Tiffany, do you have any other words of wisdom while the flag is en route?
I don't know. I could give a plug for Hillsdale.
All right. You will do that. Okay. It will be free here, unlike it is on certain talk radio programs where they charge for these commercials. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I'll give a little plug for Hillsdale then. I go to Hillsdale. I know many of you have probably heard of it. We are one of the very few colleges in the U.S. that don't accept any sort of federal funding, and we also Grove City. I see someone back there. Can't forget about them. Okay. Well, we have the flag now, so.
There we go.
Okay. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, Tiffany. Veteran participants in this breakfast will remember that a few years ago, our flag staff had an accident and fell, and the eagle on top lost its left wing. And I seriously considered the possibility that that was providential and we were meant to show an eagle with no left wing, but we did replace it. And now it's my great pleasure to present to you David Fenner, who will give us a report on Institute programs. David is Vice President of Programs at the Leadership Institute. He has served as Director of Programs at the Council for National Policy, Vice President of CNP Action, Inc., and is Treasurer of the Conservative Leadership PAC. He's a native of Atlanta, Georgia, and received his bachelor's degree from Emory University and his law degree from George Mason University Law School. David has some interesting, even hot news.
Thank you, everyone. Good morning. I have a very exciting new program to announce, not a typical program update, but to announce a new program the Institute has undertaken. For the first time ever, the Leadership Institute is now offering free online training for Tea Party activists. In partnership with the Tea Party Patriots on July 4th, the Institute launched teapartytraining.org. It initially launched with 12 LI lectures. This training is being provided free at no charge to Tea Party activists, and in return, thousands of Tea Party activists are being introduced to the programs that the Institute offers and all of our various educational programs. On your tables, you'll find an announcement that also has frequently asked questions about the site. I would encourage all of you to go online to check out what we're offering. Know that we'll be providing new content. We'll provide the latest technologies, the latest training to help enable these Tea Party activists to go beyond their high-profile protests and to impact public policy across the country this November. I would encourage you to visit the site, refer your friends to it, and hopefully this is the first of many online training partnerships that Leadership Institute will launch. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very, very much. This was a massive project which involved our technology department and programs department and other staffers. It's the first online training that we have done, and the initial response has been actually greater than we anticipated. Yesterday there was an all-staff email from our technology department urging Institute staff, please don't on your own computers use any video streaming services because our servers are having difficulty coping with the immense demand of people coming to this website that we are running. Very, very exciting. Thank you, thank you. And now to introduce our speaker, I'm presenting to you Chris Malagisi. He is the Director of Political Training here at the Leadership Institute. He's also President of the Young Conservatives Coalition, a group that he created, which is composed of young professional conservative leaders. It's a networking organization designed to organize and develop the next generation of the conservative movement. Chris received a Master's of Public Administration from Syracuse University's Maxwell School and a bachelor degree in political science from American University. Chris?
Thank you, Morton. Good morning, everyone. I had the distinct honor, privilege, and pleasure of introducing our guest speaker today, though he probably doesn't need any introduction for most of you, as we see him pretty much on a daily basis if you watch the news. We'll have a go here. Jonah Goldberg was the founding editor of National Review Online and is currently editor-at-large there. He's also a Pulitzer Prize-nominated columnist for the Los Angeles Times and is a visiting fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. His column, syndicated by Tribune Media Services, offers shrewd analysis on a wide range of subjects from political philosophy and economic trends to popular culture, with the type of entertaining writing wit that speaks to a new generation. Mr. Goldberg graduated from Goucher College in 1991. He was active in student politics there and co-editor of the school newspaper for 2 years. After graduation, he taught English in Prague for a year before moving to Washington to take a job at the American Enterprise Institute. While at AEI, he worked for Ben Wattenberg He also worked on several PBS public affairs documentaries, including a 2-hour special hosted by David Gergen and Mr. Wattenberg. Mr. Goldberg joined National Review as a contributing editor in 1998. By the end of that year, he was asked to launch National Review Online, the sister publication to National Review. Mr. Goldberg's first book was a #1 New York Times and Amazon bestseller and was selected as the #1 history book of 2008 by American readers. His book is titled Liberal Fascism, The Secret History of the American Left from Mussolini to the Politics of Change. Now, what you may not know is that his famous book had other potential subtitles that didn't quite make the cut, but are humorous nonetheless, and we should name 2 of them in particular. It was also at one time considered to be named Liberal Fascism, The Totalitarian Temptation from Hegel to Whole Foods. Another option was Liberal Fascism, The Totalitarian Temptation from Mussolini to Hillary Clinton. You know, I first heard Mr. Goldberg at the Heritage Foundation 2 years ago as he gave an eloquent yet humorous treatise on American progressivism, and I had to check this book out. And he wrote a message in the book here that I still keep and I enjoy, and I wanted to bring it here today to share. He goes, "For Christopher, for one happy warrior to another, some more ammo for the good fight." And if you've had an opportunity to read this book, you know why, that's just exactly what the message is. I immediately asked him to speak at an award ceremony I was hosting called the Young Conservatives Leadership Buckley Awards, which is a way to award young professional conservatives in the fight. And he was very gracious and kind to accept and treated us to his usual entertaining and refreshing approach to American politics. And I'm sure he'll do so again with us here today. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Jonah Goldberg.
Like I can't live up to that already. Just full disclosure, the most important news of the last 24 hours is my daughter had a terribly bad dream at 2:30 this morning, and she fortunately got back to sleep, but someone else didn't. I want to say good morning. I want to say thank you guys for having me. Leadership Institute does phenomenal work. I always sort of considered institutions like this sort of like the monasteries in medieval Europe, and they're in the Dark Ages, that kept the light of civilization alive until the barbaric hordes that would overtaken the continent were ready to receive the light again. And for about a generation now, the young monks from the Leadership Institute have poured forth with the good word, doing yeoman work. It was a very generous introduction. It left off, though, a couple important points that, as a matter of pride and considering the audience, I feel I'm okay to say. The first is that when the Los Angeles Times picked me up as a columnist, Barbara Streisand publicly canceled her subscription to the paper in protest. In my line of work, if I were in show business, I would have left the public stage at that point, because you're supposed to leave on a high note, and it really doesn't get much better than that. Another one, I guess, is that Keith Olbermann has named me the worst person in the world at least 4 times. One more, and I'm an ace. I think poor Keith doesn't understand that I'm such a big pain in his ass, because that's the fastest route to his brain. So anyway, it's great to be here. If someone could bring me a glass of water, there must be in the room with lots of interns someone who can do that. Thank you very much. So I smoked an enormous amount of pot before I got here, and I have a terrible time. I was told to just talk about what's going on in the news these days, and in my insights thereof. The story that I'm most fascinated with is this absolutely hilarious. Thank you very much. It's absolutely hilarious. Could not have appeared in a Tom Wolfe novel. Story that the head of NASA considers his foremost job to be outreach to the Muslim world. Not just outreach to the Muslim world, but to boost their self-esteem about their scientific and math skills. I mean, it is. If you haven't heard the story, this guy named Bolden, who's the chief administrator of NASA, he explained to Al Jazeera that the president gave him 3 priorities for the job. One was to re-inspire children to love math and science. The second one was to work more closely with our international partners and boost international cooperation. And third, and perhaps foremost, in his words, was to reach out to the Muslim world and make them feel better about their contributions to math and science. And, I mean, you could not write a more sand-poundingly idiotic statement for the chief of NASA. This is the kind of thing you would expect from a taste tester at a lead paint factory. And so but I think it's actually remarkably telling, and I think it offers actually an important insight to many of the problems with the Obama administration and contemporary liberalism generally. Those of you might not remember that the motto of the original Apollo space program was waste anything but time. We have to win the space race. Do whatever you have to do. Failure is not an option. You can waste anything but time, right? This was the quintessential can-do spirit of American patriotic effort, right? And it succeeded. We put a man on the moon. We beat the Russians and all the rest. And now it seems like, by his own definition, the head of NASA says that their chief mission is to waste everything, but especially time, right? I mean, nowhere in there is anything about, I don't know, space stuff, right? I mean, he doesn't say anything in his three top priorities about the moon or Mars or telescopes or any of that stuff. I mean, it is essentially, you basically turned NASA into sort of a double-headed arm of both the Department of Education and some cookie pusher desk at the State Department that's supposed to be charged with boosting Muslim self-esteem. And it seems to me, just as an aside, that the last thing in the world the Muslim world needs is more self-esteem, right? I mean, it seems to me that they could use more humility. They could use all sorts of things, but the idea that they need to feel even better about themselves doesn't seem to be one of them. Anyway, I think that, though, this is telling for a larger reason. First of all, it's a political problem, right? Because the sense is out there in the country, one of Obama's greatest problems is that this guy came in basically under false pretenses to advance a very ideological agenda. I mean, you flash back to all the talking points we had about him, and the original argument was that he was this pragmatic guy who wanted to, I mean, other than making the ocean stop rising and make sure that puppies never had thorns in their paws, he was this guy who was going to go where the facts led him, that he was going to be this bipartisan guy who wasn't president of Blue America or of Red America, but of One America and all of the rest. And he had this agenda, this well-articulated agenda. And then we had the financial crisis, and lo and behold, rather than deal with the facts now that the facts have changed, it turned out that his exact agenda that he promised during the campaign was also the exact agenda that we needed to fight the financial crisis. So a guy who had campaigned on essentially socialized medicine suddenly said in that new foundation speech in Georgetown after he was elected, suddenly declared that the one thing we really need to fight this financial crisis and make sure it never happens again is socialized medicine. I mean, it was remarkably convenient. And, forget the absolute idiocy and dishonesty of the argument that, socialized medicine had anything to do with the financial crisis. I mean, France has socialized medicine, and they were hit harder by the financial crisis. England has socialized medicine. They were hit harder by the financial crisis. It's a complete non sequitur. But it gave this sense to a lot of Americans who thought they were getting something else when they voted for him, that this was a guy charged with a serious ideological agenda, and he was determined to impose it regardless of what the polls or the facts told him. And now we have this case with this guy at NASA, and it turns out that Obama is so committed to his ideological agenda that, he's telling the chief of NASA that he should be running essentially a Muslim daycare center. And it shows you just how actually ideologically blinkered the Obama administration actually is. But then it gets to a larger point, which it sort of ties into my book. I think that there is a sort of catch-22 to liberalism. One of the things that Obama promised to do, and that liberals have been saying for a long time that government can do, is to make government more nimble, more responsive, that it can do all of these important things that Americans want it to do. It can be pragmatic and fast on its feet and empirical and all of these sorts of things. And The problem is that the very foundations of liberalism itself have made that impossible, right? Because you have now a situation where the agenda of liberalism is to create a kind of state that by its very nature cannot be nimble, cannot be responsive, cannot do the things that people want it to do. After Katrina, which was under Bush after all, there was this enormous clamor from everybody across the intellectual firmament, screaming about how government needed to respond quicker and be more nimble and get in there and help people. Now, of course, it turns out that Katrina was actually one of the greatest media scandals of the 20th century, and about 90% of the stuff that we heard was, in fact, not true. And all of these awards and prizes that the press has given itself for how great a job they did should all be rescinded and melted down for scrap. But regardless, everyone said government's got to move and move fast. And yet, when fire departments from across the United States volunteered to help out with Katrina, the first thing FEMA did was say, well, you have to go to Atlanta for a day or two of diversity and sexual harassment training. In response to the financial crisis, we had all these allegedly shovel-ready jobs that were going to, get America working again right away. Remember these weatherization jobs that we're going to somehow we were going to be a modern 21st century country by replacing windows and insulating grandma's attic. Well, those jobs were delayed for over a year because it turned out that before you can spend any of that stimulus money on these silly jobs, these easy jobs, the Department of Labor first had to have a finding for all 3,000 counties, individual findings for each of all 3,000 counties in the United States about what the prevailing wages were according to the Davis-Bacon Act. We know that after the Gulf oil spill, there's been a lot of talk about how we didn't waive the Jones Act, which basically says that you have to have American union jobs on these cleanup boats in a crisis before they can help in the area. And President Bush waived the Jones Act like the second or third day after Katrina, but Obama has yet to do it. And again, what these point to, and the examples are actually so plentiful that it's hard not to find them. I mean, can you imagine if the Department of Education devoted its billions of dollars of budget to actually just teaching kids how to read, write, and do math, instead of teaching them all of these self-esteem building and America bashing and all the other things that are in the curriculum these days? What is political correctness other than this political ideology that says that all of these institutions of government and civil society have to advance this larger philosophical agenda rather than do its own mission? And we have in the District of Columbia, the District of Columbia ranks 100th out of 100 of top urban schools in the country for its actual results in educational achievement, and it ranks at the top of the list for how much it costs. It's $25,000 per pupil in the District of Columbia to get absolutely nothing for it. And you have 50% of the staff in the Department of Education in Washington are administrators, not even teachers, right? I mean, there's this, and it is because of this idea, that it is because of this mission creep of liberalism that has calcified all of the arteries of government that make it impossible to do the important things that even conservatives agree government should sometimes do. And yet it is liberals who constantly think that if we could just expand the mission a little bit more, if we could just give more instructions to more branches of government, that it'll be able to achieve all the things we want it to achieve. Now, in my book, I pointed out that under the Nazis, and no, I'm not saying that liberals are Nazis, but that under the Nazis there was this philosophical concept called the Gleichschaltung, which you can imagine is a German word. If you ever have to wipe your eye after someone says a word to you, it's usually because it was a German. Under the Gleichschaltung, the idea was fairly simple. That basically, unlike the communists who took over the entire society, nationalized every industry, made every social and mediating institution basically an arm of the state, the Nazis had a more simple approach. They said, look, as long as you agree to our ideology, you can stay independent. As long as your fraternity becomes a Nazi fraternity, it can stay independent. As long as your business agrees to advance the causes of National Socialism, you can stay an independent business. And if you disagreed with it, you were crushed or brought to heel, or your leadership was replaced and they put in more pliable people. And in my book, I argue that there's sort of a liberal Gleichschaltung, which says that every institution in the country is progressive so long as it agrees with progressives. But the second it deviates from the playbook, the second it goes its own way, it's no longer part of the solution, it's part of the problem. And political correctness is just the most obvious example of this mindset, right? I mean, all these universities that are nominally independent, but they all subscribe to the singular philosophy of liberalism. They all feel like it is their job to advance social justice and do all of these things rather than actually provide a liberal arts education or train people for a field or anything along those lines. And we see the same thing with NASA. I mean, it seems to me fairly axiomatic that the job for NASA is to do space stuff, right? I mean, I'm not trying to be like too strict and say we have to go to the moon. There's a good argument about going to the moon, but kissing bombing the psychic wounds of kids in Morocco about their great-great-great-great-great-grandfather's contributions to science seems somewhat out of the standard mission statement for NASA. And yet this is what you get in a system that says all the oars have to pull the same way. Individual mission statements that deviate from the greater liberal movement have to be bent to it or destroyed. And this is one of the reasons why John O'Sullivan, a friend of mine who used to be the editor, who followed Bill Buckley as the editor of National Review, he has O'Sullivan's Law, which is that all institutions that are not, and I'm paraphrasing, all institutions that are not explicitly conservative will become liberal over time. And we've seen this with some of the greatest foundations, the Ford Foundation, the MacArthur Foundation, all these foundations. They eventually get taken over by the liberal Gleichschaltung, and they start thinking that their cause is social justice and they have to work with the government. I mean, this is the one true sunny upside to the BP oil spill, is that it happened to BP. I mean, if there was ever an oil company that deserved a kick in the pants, and I mean a kick in the front of the pants, it was BP, which had this whole Beyond Petroleum campaign, which treated this substance that they'd made trillions of dollars off of over the lifetime of their company, probably. They treated it as if it was some sort of evil enterprise to actually be providing jobs and drilling for oil. And they bought into the whole climate change thing. They bought into the whole government business progressive partnerships and all of the rest. And now they're discovering that when things go bad, it's no longer a partnership. They're just on their own. And I'm delighted to, I wish the spill had never happened because I'm a big booster for offshore drilling, but and because it's just a terrible thing to happen to America, but I'm so glad it wasn't Exxon. But anyway, I think that, getting back to sort of day-to-day politics, and I'll wrap it up here so we can do some Q&A. I think that Americans, while they may not articulate it very well, they have a good sense of this. They have a sense that this guy, I'm not saying he's an Alinskyite, I'm not saying he's a communist, I'm not saying he was born in a madrasa and is the Manchurian president or any of that kind of stuff, but they do have a sense that Barack Obama has come in with a serious ideological playbook, and that he doesn't quite care very much about the actual facts on the ground. He wants to get as much of this playbook implemented as conceivably possible to put America on a path towards sort of at least European social democracy. And he's had remarkable success. He's also created some remarkable antibodies. This is one of the wonderful things about American politics. It has this capacity for self-correction. I bet a year and a half ago, I was giving speeches about, to pro-market, free market, liberty-loving groups around the country, and I might as well have been talking to, attendees at a Civil War reenactment society or, guests at a Klingon wedding. I mean, we were so outside the mainstream in believing in this stuff. And now you look around and the center of gravity of American politics has swung to the right in an amazing way. You have the highest recorded number, the highest share ever recorded of conservatives of Americans identifying themselves as conservative. It is now more than 2-to-1 conservative to liberal in the American public. And all you need is about 7 more percentage points, and a straight-out majority of Americans call themselves conservatives, which is an astounding thing. And you get the sense that the American people understand that Obama and what he represents isn't really what America needs. And I think that one of the things that we're just moving forward, where I think that the consensus is going, is that one of the reasons why the economy is as bad as it is because no one trusts Obama to actually react to the political and economic realities in a way that it's required. Instead, he at every turn, and he's honest about this, he sees every crisis as an opportunity to exploit for his political agenda. And that's what healthcare was. That's what he tried to do with the oil spill. He had this amazing line where he says, if we could put a man on the moon, we can switch to a green economy, even though we don't know how to do it, right? And first of all, if we could put a man on the moon, why can't we plug the oil leak? Why do we have to switch to a green economy? Why can't we just fix the damn hole, right? I mean, he doesn't think about this logic. And second of all, we now know, thanks to his hand-picked NASA administrator, we can't put a man on the moon, right? I mean, we can make a Muslim kid dream of going to the moon, but that's not exactly the same thing. And I think, none of the economists on the right or the left have been very successful explaining the current situation that we're in. There are problems on both sides. And I think there are some arguments that are more persuasive than others. And I think the chief one, though, is really we are facing a political and psychological problem more than anything else. Because they don't trust Obama, because no one trusts Nancy Pelosi, there is this sense that no one wants to invest, no one wants to expand in a climate where you're sure that this spending is going to require greater tax increases, that you're sure that we're risking inflation. And it is an amazing moment. Right now we have American corporations, American businesses have more cash on hand than any time in American history. Trillions of dollars of cash on hand. They simply won't invest it because they don't trust the political climate. The uncertainty is so high that they want to sit, they want to sit on their money, or they want to buy gold, as G. Gordon Liddy says. Gold, gold. I mean, I love those Gordon Liddy commercials. I mean, he's a great guy, but I mean, he's like Homer Simpson with beer. Gold, you'll never let me down. Gold. And I think in this climate is this political and psychological climate that Obama has fostered that is perpetuating the economic crisis and is perpetuating the stagnant growth that we have. Remember, after a year into Ronald Reagan's presidency, the economy was in very bad shape. 18 months, which is where we are now, into President Reagan's presidency, the economy had grown by 9%. And as a conservative, I like to put it all on tax cuts and all of that. What has two thumbs and loves tax cuts? This guy. But a lot of it also had to do with simply creating a sense of confidence in the American people that we knew what the economic future was going to look like. Margaret Thatcher, when she came in, she cut taxes, but she also wildly cut spending. And something like 360 top British economists wrote her a letter saying, if you cut spending, counter what Keynesianism teaches us, the British economy will never recover. It'll take a long time to recover, or you'll cause hardships. It will never recover. As if the British would be drinking puddle water and eating their own cats for as far as the eye can see. If Thatcher had gone the way she did, and instead she rejected all of that, just like Reagan had, and Britain had a huge economic comeback. The United States had a huge economic comeback, and a lot of that simply had to do with giving a good sense to the markets, the business community, and the American people about what the road ahead looked like. No one knows what the road ahead looks like with these guys because you get this sense that they are following an ideological map that only has a passing resemblance to the map of actual reality. So anyway, I'll leave it there. Glad to take questions. Thanks for having me.
Well, we're pleased that you'll take questions. So, there's one question.
Yes, sir.
Howard Religion Cops, Citizens Opposing Prohibition. For your first remark, I keep all my free samples here. I worked on the bill in the law
Okay.
John Kennedy said, we want to go to the moon. So we just did. This is America back in the 60s when all that candy spirit, as you said. Today we live in a world, 14 trillion in the hole, et cetera, et cetera. Is America needing to accept the fact we can't do everything? Is America anywhere near accepting that idea that in today's world we do not produce enough goods and services to maintain the American empire or whatever else we want to do in the world?
Well, I certainly think we are in a current political mood that says, let's not tackle any more big projects for a while, which I don't think necessarily negates all of the glorious and wonderful aspirations of the city on the hill that is America that Reagan talked about. But when you have real problems like we do these days, there's no law that says you have to keep biting off more than you can chew. And so I think that there is that sense of it. I also think that, however, that there is something truly unique about the American character, and it will express itself no matter what the situations are. People react the way they do because they're hardwired to a certain extent, or they're conditioned and hardwired, nature and nurture, to react the way they do. And the American people, God bless them, will react, will live up to the challenges that are presented to them. That said, I think that there is this, there's this wonderful discovery I think a lot of people are making. I think it's wonderful. I'm sure it's depressing as hell to the guys at the Nation. I'm sure that, Rachel Maddow is moping like a big dog whose food bowl has been moved about it. But the simple fact is that America's greatness does not come from government efforts. NASA, people forget it. So NASA was this wonderful and special thing, but it was an institution that had a unique culture that you're not going to be able to replicate at, say, the Department of Education, right, or HUD, right? These were highly motivated, hyper-educated people who were trying to grab a piece of history. And the fact that the funding came from the U.S. government was incidental to all of this. You don't have very many bureaucracies in America whose motto is waste anything but time. You don't even have that kind of bureaucracy at NASA anymore. And I think there was a long time there after the Cold War where liberalism revived this argument that a lot of conservatives bought into, that we have to dedicate ourselves to a cause larger than ourselves, right? We heard this from McCain, we heard this from Obama, we heard this from Bush. It was this sort of cliched catechism that everyone was supposed to say, we need to dedicate ourselves to a cause larger than ourselves. And I hated this expression because what it does is it essentially defines a cause larger than yourself as a state enterprise, right? It always has to be a government-run volunteer program, a paid volunteer program too, which is always an interesting oxymoron. And the reality is, with the exception of serial killers, right, and people in comas, nobody is dedicated. Nobody is. I'm gonna put it this way: everybody is dedicated to a cause larger than themselves. Your family is a cause larger than yourself. Your job is a cause larger than yourself. Your community, your church, your bowling league, your softball league, the values you hold at the Republican Party, the Leadership Institute. These are all causes larger than yourself, but they aren't defined by your relationship to the state. And what drives me crazy about the phrase is that it basically says there is no such thing as civil society. There are no Burkean little platoons. That the family is an invisible institution, and that if you're going to be unselfish, you have to go down to the Bureau of Unselfish Affairs and sign up for some sort of program. And I think Americans have finally gotten their fill of all this stuff. This was the kind of rhetoric you could afford in the 1990s during what Charles Cradhammer calls the holiday from history. But now people understand that when people hear cause larger than themselves, they grab their wallet. And I think that is a healthy response. Americans will always mount up and save the little girl who fell down the well. But the core problem with liberalism is it wants to take that spirit of sacrifice and unity and extend it permanently into the horizon, right? And the whole point of the little girl falling down the well is that once you save her, you go back to your normal lives. And the whole point of Obamaism is that you never want to go back. We should never go back to our normal lives. As Michelle Obama says, Obama is going to fix our souls, and that we're all going to work together. The reason we have a Second Amendment is to keep the government from trying to fix our souls. And so, I don't know if you were trying to get into an argument about American empire and all that and foreign policy. I don't want to get into all that. But I think that the American people are sobering up quite a bit about what they have in front of them and the challenges that they face. And I still have a bottomless faith in the American people when push comes to shove. Sure.
Another question.
Is it on? Can you hear me? Hi. I'm Allison Efferson. I'm just a defense analyst in D.C., one of many. Okay, so Obama, you mentioned, went through was anybody surprised? I mean, is there anybody in this room who didn't know that's exactly what would happen? How did we get there, though? I mean, prior to this election, he's speaking, we all knew this would happen. I mean, he's a community organizer in Chicago, for crying out loud. That's a job description for that. So what do we do? And I know the 2000, we have the elections coming up in November, and I'm really super excited. And studies have shown that Republicans are really super excited because we're more enthusiastic and Democrats aren't. But truthfully, I'm kind of tentative about how much faith I'm going to put in. I mean, even if we get a majority, I fear that we're going to be stuck in the cog. I mean, conservatives had a majority in 94? We had that super majority, and we got some great things done. But my fear is that conservatism on the Hill has shifted and kind of drifted. So, path forward. Where do we go?
There's a lot going on there. For starters, for all the people who thought that Barack Obama was who drank the Kool-Aid, as it were, right? I mean, part of the thing that people don't seem to realize is that 2008 was the mother of all change elections, right? I mean, we should have seen it in the Iowa caucus. That was the sign, right? The Iowa caucus, the winners came in exact inverse order to their experience. So Obama came in first, John Edwards came in second, Hillary Clinton came in third, and then those Paleolithic guys, Biden and Dodd and all those guys, and Richardson filled out the rest, right? It was the exact reverse order to the impressiveness of their resumes. And that should have been a sign that it was a change election. And the remarkable thing in some ways isn't that McCain lost, it's that he only lost by 6 points or whatever it was. I mean, conservatives didn't like him, and liberals were going to vote for whoever had the D next to their name, no matter what. And independents were disgusted with Bush and tired with Bush, for good reasons and for bad ones, and we can debate those all day long. But I agree with you. Look, I mean, I have met very, 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 very few conservatives who disagreed in 2008 that the Republicans deserve to lose, right? The only problem is that in a two-party system, when you throw one set of bums out, you throw the other set of bums in. And we paid a terrible price, worse price than a lot of people thought it would be. But the good news is that the Republican Party seems to be, I have to say seems. Bill Rusher, the former publisher of National Review, he always used to tell the new young people at NR, gave him one piece of advice. I actually gave him lots of advice, but one of the pieces of advice was always keep in mind that politicians will always disappoint you, right? And the reason why they'll disappoint you is because they're politicians, right? I mean, it's Aesopian. The scorpion had to sting the frog. Politicians have to disappoint you because their top priority is getting reelected, not doing the things that you want them to do. And, the Republican Party went way off course, I would argue, and I argued at the time, with compassionate conservatism and all that kind of stuff. My problem with it was not the Republican alternative to Clintonism. It was the Republican version of Clintonism. I'm going to feel your pain and all this nonsense. I don't want the government to feel my pain. I want the government to feel my boot in its ass. And the and part of it maybe it's because my last name's Goldberg and I'm an Old Testament kind of guy. I want my conservatism to have a little more smiting and wrath to it. But regardless, the Republicans seem, and the Tea Parties are helping, right? It's sort of the miraculous power of political stem cells, right? They are regrowing a spine for the Republican Party, and the most important pivot point in American politics in the last 2 years was when the Democrats decided to go for the stimulus that they went for, right? Because I knew a lot of political consultants and guys on the Hill back then who had said, if Obama gives us half a loaf, we'll lose 40, 50% of the Republican caucus. They'll vote for this thing. They'll make Obamanomics bipartisan, and we won't have anything to run against in the fall. And there were a lot of squishy Republicans who were perfectly ready to become, to join the Babylonian captivity of the Obama era for the foreseeable future. And but they went for this stimulus package. It was like, they had, stumbled into Adlai Stevenson's, closet and went, this is perfect, and busted out this ancient bunch of, 30-year backorder of liberal programs and whatnot, and completely alienated the Republican caucus, including all of the squishes. And so the Republicans voted against it en masse. It told the Republicans afterwards that, oh my gosh, the emperor has no clothes. It's like that scene in The Man Who Would Be King. Behold a God who bleeds. And they could defy him without being crushed. And the Republicans learned that they could somehow, actually stick to their principles. And so, look, come 2010, there's an honest and good debate about whether it would be better or worse for the Republic or the Republican Party or carbon-based life forms everywhere about whether or not it would actually be good for the Republicans to truly take back the House or just come close. And I can argue that square or I can argue that circle. But if your point is simply that the Republicans are unreliable, I agree with you entirely. They're unreliable because they're friggin' politicians. And it doesn't mean they're evil, doesn't mean they're bad. Some of them are great people. But the point of conservatism is to make the country more conservative. The point of the Republican Party is to elect more Republicans. And so there will always be a healthy tension there. And one of the reasons I think both the conservative movement and the Republican Party got into so much trouble under Bush is that we lost sight of that distinction too much. In an ideal conservative system, in an ideal American political system, conservatives would have a lot of Democrats, would have a lot of conservatives in the Democratic Party too, right? Because that would move the center of gravity of American politics rightward. The trick isn't just to win elections for Republicans. The trick is to move America and American policy in a rightward direction. And all I can say is I'm with you that, we should, fool me once, shame on me, fool me 573,000 times, really shame on me. But that's the nature of politics. And I think that the Tea Partiers, they might be even too inflexible on some of this stuff, are nonetheless a healthy sign that the sort of self-correcting nature of American politics, but also the self-correcting nature of Republican and conservative politics is alive and well. I can hear it. I'll repeat it. So. The question is, she's hearing that the argument is that even if Republicans win, it's too late for the economy because so many manufacturing jobs have moved overseas and so forth. I'm not an economist. I'm sure there are smart economists who would either answer the question better or disagree with me. But I generally don't buy that sort of thing. First of all, a lot of the manufacturing jobs that we're just losing faster than we would have anyway. You can't add 700 million or a billion low-wage, unskilled workers onto the international job market and not expect to have serious repercussions for the labor market here. And those changes that are coming with globalization are baked into the cake anyway. And that doesn't mean, I mean, that doesn't excuse, say, the green jobs push, right? Because this green jobs thing that Obama wants to do will export really high-paying, good jobs that can only be done here. If you basically say we're no longer going to use fossil fuels, and instead we're going to use windmills and all this nonsense, you know, drilling for American oil can only be done in America, right? Digging for American coal can only be done in America. And if you get rid of those sectors and replace them with low-wage, unskilled, one-time jobs like putting in weather strip windows, you're not helping the economy. I mean, so I mean, there are exceptions to this. But you know, look, I mean, you know, South Korea 40 years ago looked a lot like Afghanistan today, or at least like Iraq today. You know, economies have the ability, as long as you allow for the dynamism of the market to work, to bounce back. And that doesn't mean we aren't going to go through hard times economically. But I just don't buy that if we had the incentives right, if we had the structure right, that America wouldn't be able to have serious growth again. People said this, you know, every time there is a major economic downturn, there's this idea that, you know, it's sort of the nature of bubbles, right? It's the reverse of a bubble. During a bubble, you say this can't, you know, this time it's different, it'll never end, things are only going to get better. And then when the bubble pops, people start saying, this time it's different, it'll never end. Both things are untrue. And I do believe that if we could get out of the current swamp that we're in, there are some obvious things that government could do that would encourage long-term growth. That doesn't mean, look, some of these jobs that are lost, Joe Biden, you know, is right. I mean, it just feels so weird passing my lips. But he's right when he says a lot of these 8 million jobs we lost are never coming back. Because they're not the kind of jobs that it makes sense for America to do anymore. And the question is, where are the next 8 million jobs going to come from? And I don't think they're going to come from installing windmills and solar panels. But that's what Obama thinks. And there's that. One more?
You said a moment ago about politicians. It's possibly one problem in America is that we elect a politician to office rather than a statesman, a politician being a person who will say and do anything for the next election rather than a statesman who will work in God's will for the next generation.
Right.
With the other problem is an attitude issue. We think of politicians as elected officials when George Washington, who was your most humble and obedient servant. Mm-hmm. And so he said to, before he became president, he said to a future justice, the power under the Constitution will always be in the people. It is entrusted for certain defined purposes and for a certain limited period to representatives of their own choosing. And whenever it is executed contrary to their interest or not agreeable to their wishes, their servants can and undoubtedly will be recalled. Any comments on the spirit of Washington being manifest again in America today?
Well, look, I mean, you know, George Washington was the bee's knees, but I think that we are certainly seeing that spirit working its way most intensely through the Republican Party these days, right? We saw pretty respectable conservative Republican incumbents just getting massacred in these various primaries. Not necessarily because they were all sort of apostates and who had bowed and scraped before Obama and all that kind of stuff, or voted for the stimulus or voted for Obamacare or that kind of thing, but simply because they've been around for too friggin' long. And I think that's healthy. That doesn't mean it's not unfair in some cosmic sense to these guys, that all of a sudden it's not that the rules change, it's that we finally decided to start applying the rules again. You know, and I have absolutely no sympathy for Arlen Specter. I mean that's just good stuff. But you know, with Bennett in Utah and some of these guys, you know, they got caught in the backlash against the mess that we've gotten into. And I think there's a long way to go in terms of restoring a constitutional political culture in the United States. A long way to go. But this is one of these points. I try to make this point to a lot of conservative audiences because conservatism, in many ways, has a propensity towards dyspepsia. Right? We tend to be pessimistic, at least about political things. One of the reasons why conservatives get into politics is because they see the world going to hell in a handbasket. Otherwise, they would just stick to these things called jobs, right? I mean, the reason why Grover Norquist was called the original Reagan coalition, the Leave Me Alone coalition. There is this sense that politics is this unnatural and seamy enterprise, and the conservatives only get into it in part because their patriotic conscience requires them to. But otherwise, they would much rather make widgets. And there's also this tendency among conservatives to believe in their own version of the slippery slope, which I don't like. I don't believe, it depends what you mean by the slippery slope. There are defensible uses of it. But often the slippery slope is sort of a folksy, homespun version of Marxist dialectical materialism, which says that cold impersonal forces must inexorably push society in a single direction, and that once you give up an inch, you might as well have given up a mile. And I just don't think that's true. 2 weeks ago, the Supreme Court declared that gun rights are an individual right. That is enormous. I mean, I would be worried for the NRA's long-term fundraising, because in some ways this incredibly important and divisive issue that has roiled American politics for 50 years has been somewhat put to bed, at least at the federal level. I mean, they're going to be door-to-door fights at the local level for another generation. But at the federal level, we had a watershed moment. And if you believe in gun rights like I do, it was enormous progress. As people who've read my book know, Woodrow Wilson was the first president of the United States to openly disparage the U.S. Constitution, say it was no longer relevant, needed to be replaced by a new living Constitution, that the Bill of Rights no longer applied to the complexities of the post-industrial, the post-19th century age of democratic capitalism, that we now needed a planned economy. He was the first PhD social scientist to be in the White House. And that was the idea whose time has come, this idea that the Constitution no longer applied, that classical liberalism was this antiquated thing of the horse and buggy era. And most presidents, Republican and Democrat, with the exception of Calvin Coolidge, who was put on this earth to do two things, chew gum and kick ass, and he ran out of gum pretty early. These guys, it was the received wisdom among American political elites that the Constitution really was sort of this anachronism that should be worked around rather than faithfully interpreted. Then lo and behold, you have Goldwater and then really Reagan, who comes along and says, hold on a minute. The founders were these brilliant guys who set up a system that made us the shining city on the hill, that made us distinct from all other nations and all other enterprises. It was this grand experiment, and that we need to be faithful to that cause. He gets elected president. He starts appointing judges along those lines. We have the creation of something called the Federalist Society, which created sort of the legal equivalent in some ways of the Leadership Institute, which creates these legal shock troops who actually believe in the Constitution. And now there are thousands of these guys out there fighting door to door. That's immense progress. It's not nearly as far as I would like to go. But, T.S. Eliot was right. There's no such thing as a truly lost cause, because there's no such thing as a truly won cause. It is an eternal struggle. I mean, as I said in the inscription to his book, it's the good fight. It's the eternal fight. There will always be more of them who believe that, like this NASA nonsense and this liberal Gleichschaltung nonsense, this idea that if we all work together, if we all try our hardest, if we give it our very best, we can make this the best yearbook ever, right? That kind of thing could be captured and brought into politics. This cult of unity, this cult of all working together. And there will always be more of those people who will try to get out of government what they can't get out of their families or their jobs or their communities or whatnot, that their holes in the soul will be filled up by politics. And it is fool's gold because it can't be done. But they'll always outnumber us, and there'll always be people like us who sit around saying, hey, look, government can do some things well, a lot of things badly, but one thing it can't do is love you. It can't be your mother, it can't be your father, it can't be your Aunt Louise, it can't be your church, it can't be your synagogue. It can just simply be government. And That's not to say we can't have government, but we should only have government doing the things government should do and nothing else. And it shouldn't be building the self-esteem of Muslim kids about their views towards math and science, for instance. And so, my view is that this is great news. First of all, because I'm in the argument business, and so business is good, right? But moreover, it means that, that this is something to be a happy warrior about. I mean, you're on the side of all good things. You're on the side of liberty. You're on the side of justice. You're on the side of relieving man's estate. I mean, the free market capitalism has done more to alleviate poverty, done more to alleviate suffering than any other political innovation in the last 1,000 years. It just doesn't feel that way for some people. And, the proper response from intelligent people of the right is to say to that, well, that sucks for you because we're not getting rid of it. And that's the fight that we're in. And I think it's a great fight, and I'm proud to be part of it. And I'm grateful to the Leadership Institute for all they do to contribute to that fight. So thank you all very much.
Well, thank you very much, Jonathan. I think I can predict with considerable certainty that a number of people who are not familiar with it will today get on their computers and check out National Review online. Really a sparkling presentation. As a token of our appreciation, let me present you with a Leadership Institute Adam Smith tie. This is our newest model.
I like it.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
The Institute enjoyed a wonderful July 4th weekend. Our annual National 4th of July Conservative Soiree, the 39th annual one of those, drew over 900 conservatives, and it was a Sunday, and it was the middle of a 3-day weekend for many people, and it was a great crowd. 19 conservative organizations co-sponsored the event. Jenny Beth Martin, co-founder and national coordinator of Tea Party Patriots, was the keynote speaker, and she made the announcement of the launch online of teapartytraining.org. But I want to personally thank all of the Leadership Institute staff whose work made this possible, and specifically and specially recognize Mary Kane, our director of events here at LI. She worked for months to make sure everything ran without a hitch. Mary, are you in the room, I hope? Okay. Thank you so much for the great work that you did. This soiree is a now well-established Washington, D.C. area tradition, and I hope any of you here who did not attend this year will mark your calendars now. Think about 4th of July and incorporating the soiree into your plans. I invite you, please, to join us next month on Wednesday, August 4th, for our next Wednesday Wake Up Club breakfast. I will not be here at that time because the Republican National Committee is meeting in Kansas City. I've been a member of that committee since 1988, and I have a perfect attendance record, and I do not anticipate, Lord willing, breaking that practice. I invite any of you here today who are interested in a tour of our building to meet with Seth Nichols. Seth, step up here. Meet with Seth at the podium after the breakfast. Again, thank you all for coming, and good day.